What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here with a very special guest in Fran Duffy, who has covered the Eagles for a very, very, very long time, and recently just switched avenues in which he does. What's the new gig, Fran? What are you doing now?
Sure. Well, first off, appreciate you having me, Aaron. The switch after 13 seasons working with the Eagles actually moved over to All City Network and PHLY. So PHLY is the local affiliate. If you're familiar with like CHGO with Chicago, DNVR
Sure.
with the Denver Broncos, they've got a few that have sprouted up over the last few years. Dallas just had their affiliate open up last week, and so PHLY has been around for a year, working with Bo Wolf and Zach Berman with their Eagles coverage, but then also contributing to the entire network, doing NFL draft. I'll talk about all the other teams as well within the network. So excited for certainly a new challenge, a new opportunity, and a new chance to kind of spread my analysis throughout the entire league and not just locally here in Philly.
Man, having done that, I'll tell you, that's a tough gig as
Yeah,
far as keeping track of all 32 teams. I don't miss it. Godspeed on your journey, but I did want to talk to you about the Eagles because
sure.
as we were talking about before we started recording here, I've spoken to a lot of Packers people now over the course of the last month or so. Looking forward to this game on Friday night in Brazil, Packers versus Eagles. I've exhausted every possible angle from the outside looking in as far as Packers fans, media, what have you. We've talked a lot surface level about the Eagles, but I wanted to talk to you about some of the nitty gritty stuff. Starting with obviously a lot of changes in Philadelphia this past offseason. Look no further than the coaching staff, two new coordinators. Has there been a marked difference as far as how they're running things like training camp practices, things of that nature? Or has Sirianni pretty much kept things steady and familiar to the players? Or has that been a big shift?
Right off the bat, I would say not any huge changes. I mean, if you look at even like how they went through and executed the plan for preseason, the starters on offense did not play a lick, and that has been the case over the last few years. That's not just a Nick Sirianni thing; that's a Howie Roseman thing as well, who's been the general manager now for 2 decades. So I think when you look at the way that they went about things, slight differences, right? I mean, Vic Fangio, the starters played a handful of snaps in the first preseason game. Then a lot of the young starters played in the second and the third game as well. But I think overall, no real huge changes that way. Obviously, Vic Fangio is in his first year as the defensive coordinator, but Sean Desai was a Vic Fangio disciple. He was the defensive coordinator to start the year last year. So it would stand the reason that there's some language things that are there and there's some carryover philosophically. And even though Jonathan Gannon, who was the defensive coordinator the 2 years prior, he didn't come from that Fangio tree, but philosophically, in terms of limiting explosives, playing typically from a split safety look, odd fronts, very multiple fronts up front. So a lot of the things kind of carried over from that standpoint. Where the big changes happen philosophically and schematically, while it still remains to be seen, appear to be on the offensive side of the football, where Kellen Moore got hired as the offensive coordinator this year. Eagles fans very well aware of what he can do, being the offensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys for 5 years, but comes over from the Chargers. And it seems like all the keys are being handed to him from an offensive schematic standpoint. So away from Nick Sirianni and his philosophy, over to Kellen Moore. Now, I do think that Sirianni is still going to have a little bit of a fingerprint there. It's not going to be completely Kellen Moore. It's going to be a melting pot there. But I do think when it's all said and done, it is going to be Kellen Moore's final say there in terms of what happens. He will be the play caller, all those things. So I think that that's where the big change will happen.
Let's take a look at that because I think the Kellen Moore hire, I don't doubt for a moment they wanted someone with play calling experience, someone who's been in the league for a long time and made these calls in the heat of the moment, right? Because I think the book, again, from the outside looking in, you watch the kind of the tail end of last season. It's been talked about a lot, but the struggles, especially against pressure and heavy pressure, they
Yep.
were very apparent, right? And I have to think Kellen Moore has been given the brief. Look, you've got to make sure that Jalen Hurts has more answers because it did seem, especially late in the year, that teams finally just said we can just come after this quarterback with impunity, and it didn't appear like there were lots of solutions for him. Do you think that's something that they've worked on this summer?
Certainly something they worked on, but it's really a thing where now we kind of have to see it, right? Especially
Right.
since we didn't get a chance to see any of it in preseason. Really, all we got to see was, all right, in scrimmage situations outside of one joint practice, one individual practice with the New England Patriots, which was up in Foxborough. That was all we saw from this first team offense, and from a trying to pick up the blitz standpoint. And I think when you look again, going back to last year, Nick Sirianni, where he comes from a coaching tree standpoint, you go back to like Frank Reich, who started and kind of cut his teeth with Peyton Manning and the Colts. That was where he had so much success. The way that they wanted to play offensively was very static, right? And honestly, that's the way that this offense has been. Hey, we're going to line up 2 by 2 more than anybody in the league. We're going to go 2 receivers to the left, 2 receivers to the right. We're not going to have motion. We're going to keep everybody spread out. And that's a blank canvas for the quarterback pre-snap. And you think the quarterbacks that have operated that system at a high level, Peyton Manning, certainly. You go to Phillip Rivers with the Chargers, Andrew Luck with the Colts. After Frank Reich left here with the Eagles, he went there, and Luck operated that at a very high level. When you're a quarterback that has that ability pre-snap to say, hey, you know what, let's call all the shots and we've got everything. But with the Eagles, that was not how things were set up, because Jason Kelce was a veteran center there, and he handled all of those pre-snap looks. And so when the quarterback, Jalen Hurts, and he has spoken about that, honestly, very recently here locally on the radio, Jalen Hurts, where he said, yeah, I was not asked to handle that phase of things. I think now you're looking at a quarterback that has a new lease in terms of how he's looking at it, but it's a new offense. And so are there going to be more easy buttons in the offense? I think that will be the case here with Jalen Hurts and Kellen Moore.
It's interesting you talk about the blank canvas for the quarterback. That's something Aaron Rodgers talked about a lot towards the end of his time in Green Bay, as far as, because trying to marry what Matt LaFleur was doing as far as condensed formations, lots of motion, which was against everything that Rodgers had kind of learned and wanted to do. I'm fascinated to see how much they lean on the running game, the new addition in Saquon Barkley. Again, it's, the summer, we don't really get to see much of what's actually going to occur as far as what they want to lean into tendency-wise and things of that nature. But I have to think the best friend that Jalen Hurts could possibly have is Saquon Barkley, and that offensive line, keeping them ahead of the sticks. I have to think they're going to lean into that running game early and often.
Yeah, and so, the big thing to remember is that while Kellen Moore comes in as the offensive coordinator, Jeff Stoutland remains not just as the offensive line coach, but as the run game coordinator. The run game goes through Jeff Stoutland, and there will be people, national analysts that will look at that and say, that's actually a really good thing, because when you look at the run game last year with the Chargers, it was non-existent. It was not creative. The blocking up front was not good. They didn't do enough to get those backs in space, and that might have been a talent issue in multiple areas. But when you have Jeff Stoutland, you say, okay, the run game, we're going to leave that alone. We're not even going to touch it. So
Right.
I do think there will be some schematic changes, but nothing that's going to be too drastic. I think that this is going to, schematically, philosophically, they're going to come at you on the ground game the same way that they have in the past. I think what they're banking on, Aaron, with the addition of Saquon Barkley, is that, hey, this offense with the ecosystem we have set up, one of the best offensive lines in football, one of the best schemers in football with Jeff Stoutland. High floor. That's what we want, and that's what we've had. DeAndre Swift, yards before contact last year, one of the best in the NFL. Miles Sanders in the years previous, yards before contact, some of the best in the NFL. Well, all right, what are we doing after contact? Do we have a running back that can create more for us? And that's what you're hoping with Saquon Barkley, is he's got that ability to take those 3, 4, 5-yard runs and turn them not just into 7, 8, 9 yards, but into 10, 15, 20 and score more touchdowns. And so I think ultimately that's what you're hoping for if you're Saquon Barkley and if you're the Eagles.
You talked about the offensive line, which is impressive, obviously. A lot has been talked about, again, from our side, looking at it surface level. Oh, well, Jason Kelce has retired. And I know there's little doubt that there's a plan in place. They have a new center. There's no question that this is, it's not a question of that things are going to fall apart suddenly without Kelce around. But have you noticed any market difference? Has there been much of a change as far as how they operate? The fact that Jalen Hurts has taken on more of that responsibility at the line of scrimmage?
I think that is the biggest change, is the mental side of it and the operation side of it. And again, not having those reps in preseason, I would imagine that there will be a little bit in terms of growing pains there between Juergens and with Jalen Hurts. But I honestly, schematically, I think they're going to do all the same stuff, because the skill set is very similar from Jason Kelce to Cam Juergens. He's an outstanding athlete. His ability to get out in space is evident the moment you watch him. And so, again, without having the preseason reps and the film to be able to point to and say, yeah, this is it. This is what we're going to see.
Right.
You're kind of leaning on preseason, not just from last year, because Juergens played guard last year, but going back to his first year in 2021 or in 2022 rather, where he was, I remember in Cleveland, there was he had extensive preseason action and he looked awesome. So just kind of leaning on that and saying, okay, this is the proof, the proof and what he can be at this center spot. Having him at guard last year next to Kelsey was obviously, it wasn't ideal, because when you have two guys that are that small right next to each other, it's just tough to be able to create any kind of movement on that side. But then also those guys being able to work off of each other. Jeff Stoutland really likes those guards, especially when you have that undersized center. He likes those guards to be massive. And honestly, that was a big reason why I think Mekhi Becton has been installed as the starting right guard. You have Landon Dickerson, who's a behemoth next to him as well. And so having those two twin tower guards with Cam Juergens on the inside, it's going to be a winning combination to me for this offensive line.
Flipping it around on the defensive side of the ball, and again, sticking along the interior, obviously Fletcher Cox retires. Again, that's a big talking point, but I mean, they have two young studs inside. And it's interesting to read some of the local coverage about Jordan Davis. It's weird to see him framed as, I guess, not a disappointment, but from what I've read, now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but he has not been what they expected. Is that true? Because every time I watch this kid, I think, God, this guy is a good player, but I don't see the Eagles that much.
Yeah, the flashes have been tantalizing, and the thing is that, okay, as a rookie, he came in and there were flash moments, but he kind of fell off. There was a little bit of an injury, he fell off midseason. It's like, all right, well, you know what? He hit the rookie wall, first year in the NFL. That's fine. You had all the guys ahead of him. You had Javon Hargrave and you had Fletcher Cox. Like, it was okay. All right, year two, we need him to kind of hit the ground running, and he's going to be a little bit more of a full-time player. And early on, the returns were pretty good. It was like, all right, well, he's shown up a little bit. He was disruptive in the pass game. He was pretty good against the run game most often. I think he lasted a little bit longer into the season. The problem with Jordan Davis, the problem with Jalen Carter, the problem with Josh Sweat, and a lot of these guys is that the defense just went completely into the tank. They made that change of defensive coordinator from Sean Desai to Matt Patricia, and the wheels just fell off the entire unit. And so everything looked bad. And so when everything looks bad, I know that the Packers have had some years on that side of the football where it's like, it's just tough to point to anything and say, oh yeah, like where arrow pointing up on this player, right? And so I think when you look at Jordan Davis, you say, all right, well, even I can think back to like that Buffalo game. He made one of the game-changing plays of the game, chasing down Josh Allen along the sideline and forcing him out of bounds to force a field goal, as opposed to what could have been a long touchdown run for Allen. And so I think when you look at Davis, you are looking for him to take that next step as a rusher. He hasn't quite hit the ceiling that they were hoping for yet, but it's year three at a position where it typically does take some time for guys to come along. Now you're hoping, can he stay conditioned long enough to be that kind of impact player? Not the same question with Jalen Carter. I think high hopes for Jalen Carter.
He's a freak, man. He is an absolute dog. And to me, I talked about this on one of our shows a couple days ago. If I'm the Packers, I want to get to a point where I am running hurry up, no huddle with them on the field to wear them out, because I think that's their one hope, right? I don't think the Packers match up very well. I think Elton Jenkins obviously can go toe-to-toe with anybody, but you're talking Josh Myers, you're talking Sean Ryan, maybe even Jordan Morgan. I think you got a problem if you're the Packers inside.
If I'm the Eagles, like Jordan Morgan versus Jalen Carter, that is a matchup I'm circling and saying I feel really, really good about that matchup early on. And to your point, philosophically, going back to one of the things actually you said earlier, what could change here with this team? Vic Fangio, if you look to last year when he had the two guys in Miami and really that entire defensive line, they did not rotate much. Those guys played a lot of snaps.
Exactly.
You look at Christian Wilkins, you look at Zach Seiler, those guys played a lot of snaps. The Eagles historically have been a platooning defensive line operation. They love those full hockey line changes, 4 guys in, 4 guys out, and let's keep this thing rolling. Well, that is not the way that Fangio has operated. Is that how he's going to operate this year? Because the Eagles, look, when Fletcher Cox leaves, they lost Hargrave the year before. What does the defensive line depth look like in camp? Those interior guys, I mean, you have Jalen Carter, we talked about him, absolute stud. Jordan Davis, you're expecting to take that next step. Milton Williams, to me, is a very good player, very disruptive. I know that there were opposing offensive line coaches going into games last year that said he's the guy we are most worried about up front, number 93. And so he'll be another starter there when they're in their odd fronts. And when they go into sub package, he's going to be on the field with Jalen Carter, not Jordan Davis. And so you have Milton Williams, but then they've got some other young guys that have really come on. Moro Ojomo had a really good camp. Thomas Booker earned a spot on the team with a really good camp. Both those guys were day 3 picks in recent years. So I think when you look at that interior defensive line, there's a lot to like there from the Eagles standpoint. So what is that rotation going to look like? That's a kind of a under the radar storyline to watch for the Eagles going into this game.
I absolutely love it. And then let's kick back to the secondary, because obviously this is, an area of great turnover, right? I
Yep.
think obviously you've got Slay out there at corner, and I loved his candor the last time these two teams played and Christian Watson was out there. He legit said on his podcast, I had to hold him because I didn't realize how fast he was. So I don't think, like, it's never going to be 1v1, right? Like, you're always in
Yep.
a framework and whatever. But how do you see them? I mean, I guess trying to mitigate some of the damage that these weapons for the Packers can do, because I mean, the Packers are young, but they are deep and they have a lot of ways that they can hurt you. How do you see them being the Eagles, kind of deploying that secondary? Is it going to be, I mean, I guess not strict man. Obviously, you're not expecting like 2-man every single snap, but how do you expect Fangio to try and use some of these new pieces, the two rookies in particular?
Yeah, it was one of the things certainly everybody was following going into the summer, because it was honestly a three-man competition at the right cornerback spot. Slay is going to be the left corner, and so who was going to be that right corner when they were in base? And so you had early competition where it was Keely Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers, the young veteran who was suspended all of last year to the gambling. So he was on the field for the first time this spring, and Isaiah Rodgers flashed. And so going into the summer, it's all right, it's going to be kind of a three-man competition between those two and Quinyon Mitchell, the rookie first-round pick. And Cooper DeJean started the summer on PUP. He had an offseason injury that was separate from the injury that he suffered at the end of his Iowa career. It was a soft tissue thing. So as he was on the sideline, all right, what does that three-man combination look like? Well, Aaron, a week into camp, we go out there for practice. Quinyon Mitchell's first team in the slot, and it's like, whoa, like no one really knew about this. Turns out Quinyon Mitchell, they didn't even plan him, they didn't prep him for it. He showed up one day, like, yeah, Q, you're in the
playing
slot
inside.
yeah, you're
Right.
in the slot, and so he took a lot of slot reps throughout most of the summer, and then as the summer started to shift a little bit, we started to see him get more outside reps in practice, and Avonte Maddox getting more slot reps. And Avonte has been the slot corner for the Eagles for a long time. He was getting both slot and safety reps throughout the course of the summer, and then it started to shift back to the former as the summer went on. And so what I would expect going into this game is that when the Eagles are in base defense, which I would expect, especially with the amount that the Packers like to play 12 personnel, you'll see some base looks from this team. I think it'll be Slay at left corner, and it'll be Quinyon Mitchell, the right corner, the rookie coming out. Now, when they go into nickel, I think Q actually ends up staying out there. Rodgers looks like he's dealing with some kind of an injury. So I think you'll have Quinyon Mitchell at right corner, Avonte Maddox in the slot. I do expect this team to play a decent amount of dime. Is that where Cooper DeJean comes onto the field? Because now that he's healthy, he's still coming along from a mental side. So I think it'll be a little bit of a slow burn for him to start. But I do think they want to try and get him on the field. And so I think that you could see him when you get into third down, you get into some of those dime looks, get a linebacker off the field. I think that'll be a point of emphasis for the Eagles more often than not. So get a linebacker off the field, get Cooper DeJean on there, and let's see how these matchups work in their favor.
You mentioned linebacker. I mean, it's no secret that was a real tough spot on the depth chart for the Eagles last year. And now this morning, essentially, the Eagles have ruled out their new free agent acquisition. How does the linebacker group shake out? And is there going to be improvement there at all, given how rough things were in 2023?
Yeah, and since that announcement, there's actually been some reporting from local media members from the Beat Corps that it was that the linebacker situation may have been not even injury related. That even if White was healthy, that he would have traveled,
Really?
obviously, but he
Right.
wasn't going to be a starter. And so it would have been, it sounds like, Nakobe Dean and Zach Bond, regardless, as the starting linebackers, when they're out there in that base personnel. And so my assumption going in, because all summer it was a straight rotation with like 4, 5, 6 guys, and those guys were rolling through. Sometimes you'd see, all right, it's Devin White and Zach Bond with the 1s, and sometimes it would be like Devin White and Jeremiah Trotter with the 3s. And so those guys were just constant, and that's not just Devin White, that's everybody. So
Everybody,
it was
right.
a constant rotation with all of those guys working first team, second team, third team. And so going into the season, I had no idea how they were going to handle this. If it was going to be, hey, you know what, each guy's going to have specific situations. Maybe Nakobe's out there in dime, but when they're in base, it'll be these two, and nickel, it'll be these two. Because I've seen the Eagles operate in a lot of different ways over the years. But it seems like for this game, it's going to be Zach Bond and Nakobe Dean for the majority. And we'll see if Trotter Jr. is able to mix in. Trotter did have a nice summer. I think there is some sameness there between he and Nakobe Dean in terms of like undersized guys, not the height, weight, speed that you'd ideally want? More going to lean into their instincts and their ability to play through contact. So do they want some guy to be able to complement each other? And that's where Zach Bond comes into play. Regardless, I do think you'll see a decent amount of blitzing from those guys. And maybe it's not 5 or 6 man rushes and those guys are coming, but
Right.
hey, we're going to send one and then you're dropping off a defensive end. I think you'll see plenty of that here in this game.
Fran, I cannot thank you enough for the time. I really appreciate the deep dive into the Packers' first week 1 opponent there down in Brazil. Thank you so much. We'll have a link in the description of this video where you can find all of Fran's work. Fran, thank you so much for the time, man.
Aaron, appreciate it. Thanks for having me. We'll talk again soon, man.